So Peter cracked me up. Downstairs is our workspace, and it's pretty open down there. And I don't remember the context. We had a junior developer that was kind of on a project by themselves and kind of stuck. And Peter was over there because none of us had capacity to go over there and help. And he walks away and he's like, "Yeah, I still got it." It was classic. So Tim Mecklem is in the room over there. Do you want to chime in?
Hi, I'm Tim Mecklem. I'm a development manager here. I'm mostly doing AV support tonight. I don't know where I am in my career. I guess I'm close to the second half. It doesn't feel like I should be there yet, but I guess I am. So, the first medium that I used was 5.25 floppy, and we had two of them because it was like an 8086, and we could boot the OS off of one and play games off the other until you accidentally wipe the wrong disk, and then you don't have an OS anymore. That was my experiences. That's it for me.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for running sound. Apparently, we have some folks. Do we have folks online who are live streaming? We have 4 people that are watching the live stream. I feel like I'm like at a telethon or something like that. Phones are ringing, and we have 4 people. 4 people. Can I get 5? So a little bit of preamble here. I don't want to take up too much time because I'm not the featured speaker. But here's how this kind of came about. I am 47. I don't think I'm the youngest one here, and I'm not the oldest one here. But if statistically, I don't have 47 more years in me. I probably only have about 40 in me, and I'm doing my best to push that out. But statistically speaking, I don't have 47 more years in me. I'm barking up against 25 years in the software business. And statistically, if I go to 65, then I've got 20 more. So I'm a little past half of the 40 years of development or 40 years of employment that I have. And the first half of my career was kind of on autopilot. I'm a smart guy. I was in the right place at the right time. I learned computers, and I got a first job doing computers, and then I was good at it, and so I got better at it, and I got more opportunities to do more computing, and then I'm looking around, and I'm like, whoa, what happened? And I'm 20 years into a career, and I just kind of took the default. And so my career, I had intentions about my career, but it wasn't like when I graduated college, I said, in 5 years, I'm going to be doing this. In 10 years, I'm going to be doing this. And when I'm 20, I'm going to be here. I didn't have that kind of vision for my career when I was 22 years old. And I don't know about you guys. Maybe you guys did, and you're exactly where you thought you were going to be. Or maybe you're beyond. I don't know. But I've been on autopilot for a long time. And I'm here at Gaslight, and I love it here. We have a great team. I enjoy getting up and coming into work every day. But I've been a project lead delivering on client projects forever. And there's been no real change in that for a long time. I've always been the project lead for a long time. Our teams are typically 3 or 4 people, and I pair with a developer. We have a client walk in, we do discovery, we feel out how do we get to work with this client really well, what it is that they want to do. We develop some software, we hand it to them, they go on their way, and we start over again. And this last year, I was particularly feeling like I was on a treadmill, that I was doing these projects 6 months, one right after the other, and it was the same conversation every 6 months. This is why I don't estimate software. This is why we pair program. This is why we spend time on testing. And it's just the same conversation over and over again. And I was thinking to myself, is this where it ends? Right? Do I have 20 more years of this? How can I look forward to the second half of my career with more intention than I looked at the first half of my career? And I was been asking myself for the last year plus, is this the way that I can deliver the most value to my organization and to the community around me? There's certainly value to me sitting down and pair programming with a guy who's only got 2 or 3 years of experience, or a gal under her belt. And I've been told people really enjoy that experience and they learn from it. That's great. There's value in working with clients and making that a smooth transition to them to the horrors of writing custom software. And I'm good at that. And there's value in that. But is that the most value that I could be delivering? So that's what kind of prompted this stirring. And Bill and I are officially the old guys here at Gaslight, although he's quite a bit older. But so we're commiserating over bourbon one evening, and I said, you know what? There's not a lot of people that I can see that are in my boat that have 25 years of experience in software. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, I'm just stating the fact. But there's gotta be more than I can see that are in this same boat. And can we get together and think about what does it mean to be a software developer with 20 plus years of experience? And what can we do with our career as we go forward? And Bill says, hey, let's get Glenn to come in and speak. And so I think most of us know who Glenn Vanderburg is. He doesn't need a huge introduction. My first time meeting Glenn, I don't know if you remember this or not, I was at RubyConf in Denver in like 2000 and I don't remember, and we were in Jim Wyrick's hotel room with...
Playing Cosmic Encounter? Was that?
No, it was Settlers of Catan.
Oh.
It was my first game of Settlers of Catan with Glenn and Stu Halloway and Jim Wyrick.
I did not remember that.
And I was... Good introduction to the game. It was by far my favorite conference that I've ever been to of all time. It was really a great experience. And then the second thing that, and this is why Glenn Vanderburg's name is always on my lips, is because when we have new developers who come in, I say, you should watch this presentation from Lone Star RubyConf on what real software engineering is. And I've always had a lot of respect for Glenn because he's really, I agree with a lot of what he says, and so that makes him really smart. And he's really eloquent at saying it. And so he's a perfect person to come here to kick off this group. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Glenn.
Thank you, Doug. Is this thing on? Yeah, okay. So I haven't done my introduction yet like I asked y'all to. I'm Glenn Vanderburg. I'm 54 years old. I am the Vice President of Engineering at First. We're a real estate tech company located in Durham, North Carolina, although I don't live there. I live in Dallas, work from home. I do Ruby on Rails for work and Clojure for fun. And my first removable storage medium was punch tape, paper tape. Although then there was a second one that nobody mentioned, which was little magnetic cards for an HP 41C calculator. You remember those?
Yeah, that was my first.
So that said, I am definitely a second half developer. With luck, I'm a fourth quarter developer at this point. I've been working as a programmer for 33 years and full-time at it for 28. I'm honored to be here, and I was going to, my toot my own horn section was going to be my talk, Real Software Engineering, which if you haven't seen, I encourage you to watch. And you should you should start telling people about the new version of it, not the Lone Star RubyConf one, which actually has some erroneous information in it. I recommend, this is one that I gave in December in Melbourne at Zendesk, and it's an updated version. It's the best version. It's the one I recommend people see. So if you haven't seen it, take a look at that. One thing I want to mention, I think it's fairly clear that I'm the B team for this. Doug already mentioned Jim Wyrick. It was 4 years and 8 days ago that Jim passed away. I think it's fairly obvious that if he were still here, he would be the one standing here. He's the epitome of the successful second half developer, and I miss him a lot. And not just for Settlers of Catan and Cosmic Encounter and things like that. So the intent is for this to be a quarterly meetup, right? And in this first meeting, my goal is to set that up to be an ongoing success. So I'm not particularly concerned that you walk out of here going, oh, that was a great talk. That's not my goal. My goal is that you walk out of here being excited about what the next meeting will bring and the one after that. That you have a picture of what this meetup can be in your lives and the lives of other people that you bring to it, and the other people who benefit from you being a better developer. So that's kind of where we're going here. And I want to start off with a warning. If you're not careful, and I know Doug and Bill will be, but all of you, if you're not careful, this meeting will turn into a bunch of old white dudes commiserating about how bad they've got it, or spending time scorning the whippersnappers and their newfangled ways, or seeing who can outdo each other with codgerly war stories about the old days. And I tried to get that out of your system early. Or griping about how stupid your management is, which surely ought to be old by now. I spent some time thinking about how you avoid doing that in a group like this, how you avoid ending up at that place. And there's this technique that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with called the blameless retrospective. And in the aftermath of a project or an iteration or especially some unpleasant incident, you have a retrospective where you get the team together and try to understand what happened and learn from it and come up with ways to build on what went well and avoid what went poorly and things like that. And the idea of the blameless retrospective is nobody's going to point fingers. The job is not to find who's at fault. The job's not to assign responsibility for this. And there's an interesting thing here, because let's take the case, the common case when this is the aftermath of an unpleasant incident, an outage or a data loss or something like that. Somebody's to blame, right? But you all agree to go into this meeting not talking about that. Are we just deceiving ourselves? Is that like agreeing to join in this communal lie where you tiptoe around this unpleasant truth and don't face up to whose fault it was? Well, no. The point of a blameless retrospective is that the effort to assign blame is not the constructive thing to do, and it gets in the way of a lot more valuable things to do. So a blameless retrospective is an acknowledgement by the team that bad things can happen even if everyone has good intentions. Actual causes are usually quite complex and not just one person's fault. We've seen a vivid example of this recently with the false missile alert in Hawaii, right? Where it would be so easy to blame the guy who clicked the mouse, but clearly there were much deeper issues that led to that being so easy to do. It is more fruitful and productive to use your time to look at opportunities for improvement. And finally, responsibility is much better taken than assigned. And in a good blameless retrospective, the people who made mistakes usually, whether they publicly own up to it or not, they learn from it and take responsibility to do better. So what I'm going to suggest is that this meetup should adopt the spirit of the blameless retrospective in your discussions about the challenges of being a second half developer. So this meeting is not going to be a talk. It's kind of starting out that way, but it's really going to be a guided discussion. I want to keep us from going too far down any one rabbit trail because there will be future meetings for those. The goal is to do a survey of the landscape, not an exhaustive survey, but a survey of the landscape of what this meetup can be about, with the goal of maybe you'll see something in this list and say, I'd like to come in and talk about that, or I know just the person to come in and talk about that, or it would be good to get a few of us together to do a panel on this, and things like that, and set things up for future meetings. The brief outline of the discussion, we're first going to talk about the challenges of being a second half developer, and the avenues and alternatives that we have from where we go from here. If you want, like Doug said, if you want to not be on autopilot and kind of plan your next steps and see where you can go from here. And then finally, look at the particular opportunities that the most experienced people in a software team or a software company have to offer. So, challenges. We face some challenges in our careers, and there are various different reasons for those challenges. Some of them are perfectly legitimate. Some of them are bogus, driven by fears or misconceptions that we or others might have. I'll try to avoid hitting the microphone again. And some of them are kind of a mix of the two. So this is the point where it stops being a talk. Let's focus on legitimate challenges, real reasons that sometimes being a developer in the latter part of a career can be difficult. And if it's easy for somebody to get to the mic, that's fine. If not, I'll repeat the observation. So,
well, one is changing technologies.
that's right.
So when you're good at something, it's like the innovator's dilemma, right? When do you go to the next thing? Or do you just keep, I know people that I worked with 25 years ago still doing C++ that I taught C++ to. Mm-hmm. And, I kind of wonder about that.
And and depending on your industry, that might be exactly the right thing. Your sector of the industry, it might be the exact right thing to do. But it's always kind of an interesting trade-off. When is it time? When is it still worthwhile to keep getting better at what I'm currently doing, and when is it time to prepare for the next thing? Yep,
and I think also getting older, that you see that it's sometimes easier for people without any programming baggage to learn the next wave.
That's right.
So in some ways it's harder to decouple from your current thinking, and so I kind of wonder, when is this going to be too hard to switch to the next one? Mm-hmm. But
who else? Doug in the back, or Scott first. And
I really appreciate your answer, because I had a bet with myself that the first thing that people are going to mention is do you still program in the second half of your career? I've heard an interesting turn of phrase come up more and more frequently, talking about being post-technical. And that's trying to be a polite way of saying, that dude don't code no more. And I really pride myself on being an architect who codes. I feel like an architect who doesn't code is like a chef who doesn't eat. And so I feel very strongly that for me, staying up to date with those technologies and being in the trenches and coding, but I do recognize that I'm not the right candidate for someone to be, pulling story points every week and coding 40 hours a week. So I think that balance of how do you maybe not code anymore, if post-technical is your turn of phrase that you enjoy, how do you stay post-technical but still stay abreast of the latest technologies, and how do you stay relevant if you're not putting your fingers on keyboards?
Mm-hmm. So, Doug in the back.
I'm going to just jump right into the reality here that there is both a guy and a girl, and I don't specifically know their names, here in Cincinnati with 5 years experience that can code Rails as well as I can. And they make a lot less money than I do.
Right. Yeah, we make more money, and sometimes we aren't significantly more valuable, at least in ways that a lot of managers understand, than people very new in the industry who make a lot less money. Sometimes, we bring experience, but that experience leads us to want to be a little more slow and deliberate, which might, we think, of course, be more valuable over the long run, but to some managers that just seems like, it takes them longer.
Not only are we more expensive, that we look slower.
Yeah, that's right. And this is still under the category of legitimate reasons, right? What else? James, is that your name?
One of the things that I think is legitimate is the question of, is writing code the most valuable thing I could be doing? Mm-hmm. Or is helping people or teaching people, or like you said, using that experience somehow other than writing code that someone else who has a lot less experience and is paid less can write as legitimately as good.
Right.
Sorry, you want to go? So, a couple days ago, I also do Toastmasters, and I ran into this guy, 33 years of technical experience. Most of his time was in technical programming, and he felt the need to move into Gartner. And
into what?
He started working for Gartner.
Oh, okay.
Magic Quadrant people.
Yeah.
And he was under a lot of pressure to publish papers and speak. And he was struggling, and there's a lot of people younger than him, and a lot of people were telling him, hey, you got to do this if you want to keep your job here. There's a pressure to move outside of whatever it is. Mm-hmm. I think it takes about 5 years, based on most of the job postings that I see, 5 to 8 years to become a senior developer. And if you've done it for long enough, then what do you do?
Right.
Do you go on circuit? Do you go work for Gartner? You become a director or a manager? You're forced into something. Yep. So I think that's a legitimate challenge too.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that in the next section when we talk about the different avenues that are available to us.
I feel like for the first half of my career, probably, everything seemed so interesting that if... Yeah, okay. You get it.
So I've got a list of things that I've got a list of things I thought of in case y'all didn't have good answers, and that's definitely one of them.
Enough said.
No, that was.
Oh, well, I mean, and so I would spend so much of my time, not because anybody was making me. It was just like, if something else didn't need doing, I was probably doing something code related because I liked to.
Right.
The amount of things that come along that grab my interest outside of work has gotten way smaller. It's a variety of reasons. Part of it is things just, there's a circle, and once you've seen the same thing come around the third time, you're like,
yeah,
whatever.
I never thought it would happen. I never thought it would happen to me, but I found myself, I'm weary of learning the next new thing, JavaScript's not the next new thing. Today's JavaScript is the next new thing. Tomorrow's will be the next new thing. Yeah. So, anybody else? Let's talk about some of the bogus reasons, the challenges that exist for, real but not valid reasons.
I could actually start with one of those. I've gone to a couple places where the expectation is there that the dev team does 24/7 support. I do not recover nearly as well as I did when I'm 25. If you wake me up in the middle of the night, I'm basically down for 2 days.
Right.
That's not the case for somebody who's 25.
I think this falls back under the legitimate reasons, and it's one I forgot to mention, which is we are older, we don't recover that way, we have families and aren't interested in working the hours that some of the younger people are interested in working. So yeah, I think all of that falls under the legitimate category. Okay.
I mean, I was just going to say that I certainly feel, I think for personality, like self-doubt reasons, it's mentally, I think we probably all struggle a little bit with things, and that can be bogus, it can be real, but it's certainly something I challenge. I feel like, it's a challenge for me, semi-regularly. I'm like, the existential crisis. I know I talked to James about this quite a bit, but I have this, what am I doing sort of thing. And some of that's bogus, some of it's just like, I'm not thinking through things, but it's self-doubt.
I say bogus, but it's all very human, right?
Right.
Exactly. It's not, it might not be completely irrational, but it's definitely human.
20 years of the baggage of being pulled in directions and conforming to what people tell you to do, do the wrong thing, get this shipped faster. We all have a lot of stuff stuck in the back of our head. A lot of think of it as I don't know, post-traumatic.
Yeah. Yep.
As far as bogus, I would say it's similar to Ben's lines, this belief that inherently this is a young person's game.
Right.
And that, if you stick around too long, you're going to be discriminated against, and, it'll be hard to find a job. Those kind of fears that are somewhat bogus, somewhat not bogus, depending on where you're at, is hard.
If other people believe that this is a young person's industry, that presents a challenge for us. If we start to believe that it's a young person's industry, that presents a challenge for us. And like you said, it's not, there's some reality to it, but as people like Jim show, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, I think playing off Ben's comment as well, the way that I think about that is I'm afraid I can't keep up anymore.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that the way that I think about things is too slow compared to the way some of the less experienced people just rush right in. I'm going to just do it, and then lo and behold, if you give them a week or so, they come out with something that probably works okay. And I want to stop and slow down and say, please let me think about this.
Yeah.
And I just feel this pressure that I can't keep up anymore.
Right.
And I think that that's largely bogus because I've shown I jumped on a Elixir project and learned a new language in less than 6 months and am productive in it. But at the same time, that 6 months was harrowing of feeling like I have to learn in a completely new paradigm in 6 months and produce shipping, quality code for a client who's paying me a lot of money.
We both brought a lot of baggage to that pairing, right?
Sure. Sure. All right, we have somebody who just walked in. I'm going to put them on the spot.
Okay.
Give us your name and what you're doing and one of the challenges you face in your career, legitimate or otherwise.
Charlie Ross. I'm job hunting. I'm over 60. Do I have to say any more?
Nope. Not if you don't want to.
I get interviews, but then they see the hair,
Yep. So Another thing I have on this list of challenges that fall under the bogus category, and we've covered most of them, you have the fear that you'll be unable to learn the next new thing, which is close to what you were saying. But also, as our peers move into other careers and retire, and we found ourselves surrounded with younger people, again, it's a human thing. You start to feel like a threatened minority, and you feel defensive or tentative. And that becomes its own challenge, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that can lead to a self-defeating attitude of I don't have what it takes, people are against me, whatever, and that doesn't end well. And like I said at the beginning, that's one of the reasons you want to avoid letting this group become mostly about that over time. So was there anybody else before we move on to the next one?
One of the things that I've kind of struggled with, and that's mostly bogus, is the idea that, like, if I stay a developer or stay technical, that somehow makes me a sucker, right? I should really just, take the management route or take the, project manager route, and that, somehow that by being non-traditional, I'm not going to benefit like others.
Yep. Okay, now I've also got a few that I think are a mixture of both. But y'all help me out. Anything like this come to mind? Mm-hmm. Oh, you can just talk, Scott. We can hear you.
On my tombstone, I want it to say, "This is my inside voice." One thing, I can't tell if it's legitimate or bogus or not, but sometimes I think there's a real lack of appreciation for the history of a language or a technology or a platform you're on. I got into a Twitter fight recently with someone who tried to claim that Microsoft was, standards compliant, in the IE world, and I was stomping my foot in anger, saying, "No, you didn't live through this. It was the opposite of these kinds of things." But there is a history to Java. There is a history to JavaScript. There is a history to Ruby, and sometimes if you're always focused on the newest and the latest and greatest, sometimes that idea that the history is lost, and I think that's important as developers as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Yeah. People who have a fairly narrow experience who think that experience is all that it is, Yeah.
It's representative of everything.
Of everything, right. I'll get a little deeper into my recent background in a bit, but I spent 4 years as a senior manager / director at Living Social. That involved planning layoffs, which was the least fun part of the job, so much so that I signed up for one myself. But I learned some about how that sausage is made. In a downturn, businesses might choose to keep lower salaried employees over experienced ones. And depending, that might be the best business choice, depending on the business and their situation and the constraints they're under. It might not be short-sighted lack of appreciation for your skills, but it might be the sound business choice of it's always a gamble when you lay off people and shrink your payroll, and there may be good reasons to think we'd be better off with more lower salaried, less experienced people and fewer of the more experienced people, and that's a challenge for us. Another thing that falls into this category is think about what happens to your investment portfolio as you get closer to retirement. What's the recommendation? Reduce risk, right? Your time horizon for when you want to start using this, need to start using this, is shrinking. So there's less time to recover from a loss, so you reduce risk. Doug, you were talking about learning a new programming language in 6 months. When you decide you're going to set aside the old thing that you have experience with and learn the hot new thing, that's a risk. And you take a step backward in productivity, and therefore you take a step backward in value for money, right? Do you have time to recover from that in the remaining portion of your career and get back to the point where you're as valuable as you were using the stuff that you're already an expert in? And the reason I say it's a mixture of both is depending on where you are in career and what your learning abilities are and how long the new thing takes to become an expert in and so forth, you might have plenty of time, but your fears are mixed in there as well. And so that can keep us from taking a step that would really be really beneficial in our career. So one way to think about that is like your investment portfolio as you get closer to retirement. Another way to think about it is like when a football team gets in the red zone and the field is shorter, and that cuts off some of your options for how to run your offense, right? As you get closer to the end of your career, or what you hope will be a happy end to your career, your options get closed off a little bit. Maybe not a lot, but some. So what avenues do we have available to us? We can continue as an individual programmer or tech lead, and a lot of people do. James is right that sometimes that's perceived as kind of being a sucker or lack of ambition or something, right? You could make more by going into management or whatever. You can become a manager. I did that 6 years ago, 5 years ago, I guess. Went from being a tech lead of a small team to director over a team of 45, which was pretty fascinating. I made the decision when I agreed to do that. I had in my mind, I didn't want to. Our VP of engineering asked me to, said, I've got a team that needs help and I think you can do it. Would you please do this? And I said, well, you can put up with anything for a year, so I'll try it. And I committed to not writing any code for work for a year because I knew I had a lot to learn about management, and if it would just be way too easy to rationalize, oh, this code is important, so I'll spend time doing that and not do that. So I didn't write any code for work for a year. I did hack on a few little side projects on the weekends to keep my sanity. And it was fascinating, and I liked it. Now I'm a VP of engineering, which sounds like a lofty title, but when I took the job 18 months ago, there were 2 other engineers. So what that really means is that I went back to coding full time. And I've been doing that mostly for 18 months, and we're just getting back to the point where we're going to be hiring more people, and I'll be really a manager again. And the interesting thing is, the first time I didn't want that to happen, and I was very apprehensive about it. Now I'm excited about it. I'm really looking forward to that again. And partly because I've seen that as a manager, I have more leverage and impact in the company, amplifying the work and direction and skills of a larger team, making sure they're pulling in the same direction and developing as they should, than I ever did as an individual contributor. A good example of this, Scott and I have a friend named Brian Getz. Brian works for Oracle as the architect of the Java language specification. And at the time he took this job, all of us in our little circle of friends that hang out with him, we're already kind of past Java. We were all Java programmers or C# programmers, which is essentially the same thing for purposes of hipness, right? And we're like, why do you want to do this? And I've heard Brian actually respond to this question in talks that he gives. And he's like, well, look, there are, and I don't know how many million Java programmers there are in the world, but he always has the number on the tip of his tongue. There are N million Java programmers in the world, and if I can make each of them 0.5% more effective, that's a lot of leverage in the programming world, right? And so if I can guide the Java language to be a better Java and help those 6 million or however many programmers, that's a lot of leverage, and that's a fun challenge. And during my 3 years as a director at Living Social, I kind of started to understand that leverage that you can have as a manager in an organization, and I got a taste for that. And so this second time that I'm poised to become a full-time manager, I'm finding it exciting and I can't wait, whereas before I was kind of apprehensive about it. We could become a teacher or trainer, internal within a company, external working for a company that does training on their products. Training is a position where your age might actually help rather than hurt in the perception of the people you're working with and for. If you can build a decent reputation in a particular niche technology, and if you're a good teacher, corporate training is a pretty decent, like, semi-retirement plan. It's reasonably lucrative, and you can spend part of the time marketing and part of the time developing material and learning new things, which is loads of fun if the pressure's off, right? And then part of the time on the road teaching, which by the time you're an empty nester starts to seem kind of attractive instead of a giant hassle. A lot of people can adopt mentor roles within a company. In a way, what Chris does managing the mentorship program here at Gaslight falls into that category. This is usually not a full-time job, but it's a way of amplifying your value as a technical contributor in an organization, making the others around you better, not just cranking out code yourself. Some organizations still value architects, and I kind of agree with Scott that an architect who doesn't code is like a chef who doesn't eat. So an architect is a nice way to amplify your effectiveness in an organization while still remaining technical. What else? So how many of you are at least part-time managers right now? Well, 2, 3, 4, yep. It's much more fun and interesting than I thought it would be. Sure largely is influenced by the fact that I was lucky enough to have a really good team of peers. I'll tell you what, though, you're a lot better off being a manager on an engineering team than on a sales team. Just not on a sales team, from my experience, from what I've seen. Anybody else have anything to add to this? Anything I missed? Okay. All right.
So my forte over the last few years has been project lead on a small team, much like what you were, Glenn, before you went into management. I had a gal on my team, and we had a particularly good project. And so there was a new project coming on, and there was a desire for me to move on to the new project. And so we made a decision to transition the leadership of the existing project to this gal. And she had less than a year experience at Gaslight, and she was a designer. And we were asking her to take on the project lead role with 4 developers working on the team, one of which was, let's say, personality-wise, pressed for authority. And so I worked with her one-on-one to help manage the transition. And I showed up for some of their meetings, and I showed up one-on-one with her for a few weeks. Now, I'm going to say Katie's fantastic. There's no doubt in my mind that Katie was going to excel in every way that she was given the opportunity to. But I like to think that the time that I spent with her accelerated what she was capable of doing. And I invested less than 40 hours of my time in Katie. And the result was that the project that she was on wrapped up beautifully, and we're re-engaged with them. And she went on to a new project where she was the project lead, and she did beautifully there. And the result of that project was that the client is so enamored with our work that he's re-upped and just basically is on indefinite re-up. And it has a lot to do with the team, of course, but it has a lot to do with her as a team lead. And I think about how little I invested in her and what the impact of that is long term. It's a huge multiplier. And that feeling of I had a little bit to do with her success and with her long-term prospects and her blossoming as a leader in the organization. She always had this in her, but being able to help that bloom sooner, it felt terrific. And I thought, in the meantime, I'm just sitting here trugging along, running another project. And I'm dumping all this time into this project, and the client's not that excited about what I'm doing. And we're doing great work, but we're just like swimming upstream or just paddling as fast as we can. And I think, man, if I could spend more time with the Katies and leverage that experience of investing in people like her, that would be fantastic. That feeling was just fantastic of participating in her growth.
And not even just for a wow, I was great at that. It's you're sharing in the excitement of what she's able to achieve.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. It's not so much what I
Right.
didn't achieve it. It's what she was able to achieve and being proud of what she did.
Yeah, that's something you find a lot as a manager if you have a good team and if you get to build a good team. I'll say one more thing about. Well, I was going to, and now it's gone straight out of my head. I was going to say one more thing about the fun of being a manager. Oh, I remember what it was going to be. I'll say one more thing about being a manager. What I learned when I was younger in my career, I made up my mind I didn't want to be a manager. In retrospect, I've thought a lot about why I didn't want to be a manager, and it was because I didn't want to be like managers I knew. And there are a couple of aspects to that. One was that they, saw people as interchangeable cogs, or wanted to direct us and control us rather than enable us. Or one in particular was they kept trying to be technical when they weren't anymore. By the time I became a manager, I had learned all of those lessons about what made a good manager and what made a bad manager. And I had also learned I didn't have anything to prove on the technical side of things anymore. And I don't want to say I was a terrific manager because I made a lot of mistakes. And if I hadn't had a couple of good peers to help me navigate those and do a good job, I probably would have failed pretty miserably. But I tried to enable people rather than directing and controlling them. I tried to see them as individuals and identify their strengths and help build those strengths rather than seeing them as fungible pieces in my little power puzzle. And I knew how to contribute technical expertise where people needed help and keep my mouth shut and trust their technical expertise when they didn't. So, yes. And so what I'm saying is, when I was in the early part of my career, I made the decision that I didn't want to be a manager. And that was the absolute right decision for where I was in my career right then. My only mistake was thinking that I wanted that to be true for my whole career. But I reached a point of growth where it was the right time to become a manager. So, because I had learned how to be a decent one. So you've got the mic. So.
Yeah, and I think this is going to turn a little bit story-wise, I think. But I had a really good experience. The first company that I worked for post-college had very explicitly separate managerial and technical tracks within their organization. And so there were the management side people who were dealt with, they were dealing with administrative kind of things. They were sort of watching out for the career paths of the people that were in their group. But there was also technical leadership within the projects. And there was a whole technical track that topped out at consulting scientist. I saw it in one of the presentations, which basically, they had the salary ranges for these different, job titles. My title was literally member of technical staff. That was your entry level title. That was the only title at Bell Labs, so that's okay. The title was consulting scientist, and it had no top end on salary. It's like, whoa, that's kind of nice. And I've also worked in places where I've had managers who knew they weren't technical, but they were good at managing, and they were very good at knowing when, this is a technical thing, I'm deferring to your experience, your judgment. And I've also had managers who did not meet those criteria. And the first time that I stepped up to actually be a manager was when the group that I was part of, they'd gone through 3, maybe 4 managers in the course of about a year and a half. And I said, rather than hiring another revolving door manager, I will manage this team of, I think there were 8. So I was, I basically had 7 people that I was now a manager for, rather than having another, manager of the month get hired in and move on, quit, whatever. And that worked out okay, but it was very hard to separate the manager side from the I used to be your peer kind of side. I was sort of senior before making that transition, but it was somewhat difficult. And after a little while, they reorged as they were wont to do, and so they reorged things, and I was no longer a manager, which suited me fine. But that also left me in a place where I was sort of dotted line to a lot of projects, but not solid lined to any project. And when time came for some of those, how can we reduce payroll, save some money, maybe reduce some headcount? Oh, let's draw a line here. And, he's not on a project, he's at the top of the salary list, he can go. But that turned out to be a good thing, because that's when I did the successful transition to being independent, which I had unsuccessfully tried many years earlier. And this time it stuck. Cool. And I've helped 3 or 4 clients hire people. When I've said, no, you don't want to hire me, you can't afford to pay me what you're paying me full time all the time. Let me find someone who's, a half or less of what you'd have to pay me, who can easily do the thing that you need continuing to have done, and not all the other things that I can handle for you as you grow, but I don't want to do full time either.
Okay, so we've been going for almost an hour. So let's talk about opportunities. Doug started this off, telling about how this meeting originated, and the goal is about learning from each other how to be more intentional about planning the rest of the career, and not only that, but about making the rest of your career better than the first. So let's talk about the opportunities we have, and I'm going to seed this with a few questions. How does our picture of success change? How does or should our picture of a successful career differ from what we thought it was when we started our careers? How do we make our experience really count for something, really valuable? Having all this experience is fine, but if we're just sitting cranking out code maybe a little better than it was before, it's not going to justify continued salary growth up to and employment up to the end. So how do we make that experience really count for something? And then how can we make the second half of our careers better, not just for ourselves, but for our families, our coworkers, employers, and customers, and the technical community that we're a part of, or the non-technical community that we're part of, for that matter, right? So I will start the discussion by calling back to something I said earlier about how it's easy to start to feel like a threatened minority and feel scared and defensive and tentative. Part of the answer is here, if we have experience and we think it's worth something, we should be bold and confident in ourselves. Being tentative about ourselves and doubtful and wondering if we have anything to contribute is a recipe for, a self-fulfilling prophecy. And think about the things that you do have to offer and how that experience can be brought to bear on the problems that you're facing, your team is facing, your company is facing. Related to that, even if you're not going to move into management, a number of years ago, y'all remember a conference called SD West? Pretty prominent conference at one time. I was at SD West, and I went to a Birds of a Feather session afterwards that was organized by Scott Ambler, I think, and maybe one other person. And yeah, okay. So if I remember correctly, it started off, and I can't remember what the title of the session was or anything, but it was intentionally to draw in both technical and non-technical folks, right? And I knew most of the programmers in the room, not all, but most, and didn't know most of the non-programmers in the room. And because they tended to know each other, it was kind of separated into two halves of the room. And Scott or whoever was leading it said, "So how many of you are business people?" And one half of the room raised their hands, plus me. I remember looking at all my programmer friends going, what? And that was exactly the point he was trying to make, right? It was a trick question, and it's like, no. You're a programmer, but you're also a business person. And you need to acknowledge that and not shy away from it and learn to think that way, because your career is your business. You need to market yourself. You need to position yourself to be competitive. And also, you'll be more valuable to your employer if you understand their business concerns and their competitive goals and their risks and what your boss is scared of, what keeps them up at night, and things like that, all makes you a more valuable programmer if you think of yourself as a business person. So that's kind of what, does that give you a picture of what I'm looking for make our experience really count for something, right? Think about what you have closed off by maybe being so technically focused, ways that you could really be valuable. That's an example of a faulty assumption or trap that we're sometimes, we allow ourselves to think about, that, oh, we're technical, we're not business people. Another example of that is that this is a zero-sum game, and new young programmers coming into my company, or diversity initiatives that broaden the pool and try to bring in more young, inexperienced programmers into the company, threaten me because it's a zero-sum game. That's a self-defeating way of thinking. And Doug mentioned earlier today that it's a theme around here that a rising tide lifts all boats. And you should mind your loyalties, by which I mean I've always believed that job security is a myth. That's not to say that you shouldn't, work hard and support your company and be loyal to a reasonable extent, but your career development is your responsibility. A good company will help. A good manager will help. And they should, but ultimately they help because it's in their best interest to develop you as an employee. They don't do it because it's their responsibility to make sure you're successful in your career. That's your job, right? And so you should spend as much time thinking about how to make yourself valuable as an employee as you do thinking about how to write good JavaScript code or whatever it is that you do. So there I've thrown out a few things to get this started. What else, Chris?
Yeah, I was really struck by that second bullet point there. I thought of it more or less, less in terms of like making it count financially, but more in terms of like I got to a point in my career where just the idea of writing more code to maybe make some client some more money was just like not enough.
Right, yeah.
And that kind of led me to the apprenticeship thing that I've been doing. And kind of like Doug's story, like the idea of building people rather than just building software has really made a difference in terms of feeling like what I do matters. And it also turns out it's very compatible with financial goals as well. Like, they're totally not exclusive to one another by any stretch.
One of the best ways to do that is to look beyond yourself, right? Look outward and upward and downward in your organization to see who you can help, who has problems that you can have some insight into. How can I share my expertise and my experience? And that's another case where thinking of it as a zero-sum game would cause you to withdraw and not share that, and that actually makes you less valuable to your organization. Yeah.
So I also think it's kind of interesting. I don't know how many people, at least one other person, has the title architect, and I'm sure many of us have had that title over the years. I've probably had it for over 10 years. And it kind of seems now in my career like this complicated trade-off decision matrix of like a race to the end and doing the least harm or enabling the most amount of people. And that's kind of cynical, but we have, Doug and I, like being here, we have a great culture. And there's two things that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and it's because of Doug half of it's because of Doug, and half of it's because of Mark Winholtz. And one half of it is, Doug mentioned Harvey, and he said, I'm not going to get the quote right, the movie Harvey. He said, there's a quote from that movie. Try to be really nice. Go ahead.
In Harvey, James Stewart says, I've tried being really nice and really smart, and I recommend the former.
That's it. And the other one was when Mark came in and gave his XP Agile, Modern Agile discussion. And I've been thinking a lot about culture and how it influences us and how to not to stay above the influence of culture or create a subculture or be around a good group of people. Because especially as an architect that should be having insight and answers, and a lot of times you feel like you're graded by how much you know and the quality of your answer and the quality of your insight. I feel like it's important to understand that your culture's expectations and sometimes bias and prejudice and the ability to be accepting and make people awesome, or judge people and be critical and be backstabbing or scrutinous of anything that goes wrong, have a tremendous impact on the way you use solution and the way you think about your place in the world and the way that you approach your future. And so Mark has had me thinking a lot about how do I stay above the influence and a good guy, and
As opposed to under the influence?
Under the influence, yeah. How do I still be useful to my organization, but useful to the community?
Yeah.
And how do I stay supportive and a better mentor and continue to grow and not just the smartest guy in the room or the biggest man in a midget convention or however you want to put it.
Right.
So.
There's an old quote from the days when there were things called systems programmers, right? I can't remember who said it, but systems programmers are the high priests of a low cult. And yeah, it's easy to fall into that trap.
Are those called systems architects now?
No, I don't. It's not quite the same thing. Yeah.
So over the last few talks I've given at users groups, I put I'm self-employed, so one of the services that I offer is project therapy, and just
lie down on the couch, please.
I've just found that, well, usually over tacos, but that if you can just be somebody, I don't have an allegiance to any company, so just being somebody that people can basically talk to about what's going on their project without any judgment. They obviously get judged a lot at their company and stuff, so I've just found that being a good listener is something that I've learned from 20 years of marriage as well. It can help you build good relationships with people, and that can usually lead to good things.
Right.
I'm closer, Scott, sorry.
Turnabout, etc.
Here's what I heard from what Jason said. As an experienced individual at an organization, whether we're a guest or whether we're a member, we have a disproportionate amount of influence on the culture. Walking in here today, Ed said that he's at his new gig, and when he talks, people stop talking and listen. We have the opportunity to establish a culture of support and encouragement and growth and a positive culture, or likewise, we can be the cranky old man in the corner complaining about what we wish things used to be and get off my lawn. And the fact that we are the guy in the room with the most experience, that has an impact on the culture around us. And so when we talk about the opportunities and how do we make our experience really count for something, how can we use that experience to have a positive impact on the culture around us, because we do have an impact.
Yep.
I also really like that second bullet point up there. How do we make our experience really count for something? Because I didn't have
trademark now. Okay.
I didn't have a pat answer for it, but it reminded me before I'm with my past couple of companies. I ran my own consultancy, a boutique consultancy in Denver for over a decade, and I said that people would hire me because of my successes, because I wrote half a dozen books, or I spoke at a conference, or because of my things.
And they'd fire you because of your failure?
Well, no, but I said, you're really hiring me because of my failures. Because, I am here to tell you all the ways that this can go wrong. And success without failure is really luck. And success with failure, and again, you stole a little bit of my thunder, but deeply informed failure, like many firings. I've got a high school son, and he was devastated by the first F that he received in school, because he was concerned about how I was going to react. And I said, let me tell you about the first F I got, and let me tell you, Fs suck. Getting fired sucks, but the second time you get fired, it's easier than the first. And but that was not the lesson I was trying to teach her, by the way.
You get really good at it.
Yeah, you get really good at it. Yeah. But every book that you write is better than the previous one, because it's informed more by the failures than the successes. Mm-hmm. And as an architect, I've made more mistakes than a green developer. And being able to bring that to the conversation and say, you don't even know how this is going to go so horribly wrong. So let me tell you, and not from an academic perspective, but let me tell you my experience when I was your age and I was doing exactly what I did, and I got fired, or this project went south, or I did an RMRF on route, right? I mean, all of these kinds of things are what inform your success, and it's not fun failing, it's not fun getting fired, it's not fun getting Fs in school, but I think those are what inform your successes, and that's what justifies your high salary or your high bill rate or things like that, because I've failed more than you, and a whole lot more than you, and let me tell you how.
So speaking of failures, while you're passing the microphone back to James back there, I'll tell this little story. Young programmers get, and by young I mean under 40, I guess, there's a problem that occurs, right? And you're trying to debug this, and you're trying to find the source of it. And what's like the most frustrating thing? It's when you get to the point of, how did this ever work in the first place? Right? Or conversely, when you can't reproduce it in any way, but it keeps happening. There's those kinds of those things where the evidence doesn't match what's happening. Right? It's a very frustrating thing. And when I'm pair programming with people diving in to help with these problems, or with problems, and you run into one of those things, I have learned through years of failure and years of running into these things, when my pair partner is getting really frustrated at something like that, that's when I say, we're about to learn something. And the first time they hear it, they want to hit me, but that's really the right attitude to have, because it's always true. Oh, we're about to learn something we didn't know before, because we don't understand how this can be this way, and it is.
Yeah, you kind of stole my thunder a little bit, because I was about to say, like, the most exciting thing is knowing that you're about to fail, and letting not just say, you can, and sometimes that's absolutely the right thing to do, is say, let me tell you why this is going to fail ahead of time. But sometimes the best thing to do is know it's about to fail and let them walk right into it. In a safe environment. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Right. Yes, it's yeah. So I've had a lot of fun getting to have that teachable moment, and that was one of the things I admired most about Jim Wyrick was that he would let people fail and then absolutely be super excited about the learning moment. Let me explain to you why that didn't work. You know?
And he would say, "Oh, that's a good idea. Why don't you try that?" And he wasn't. He was being perfectly honest. It is a good idea. It's wrong for reasons you'll learn, but it's a pretty good idea. So try it, and then you'll learn the limitations of that good idea. Yeah,
absolutely.
There was another.
So in the bullet point number 2, and what Doug was saying about how we can influence culture, and I'm thinking culture on our teams or whatever, not universal, and try to solve small problems. One of the successes I feel I've had over the last couple of years is I worked for a startup. We had a little bit of a dip where it was kind of like that cycle of the first team that got most of the stuff written, kind of quit and lost interest or whatever. Funding challenges, which we're now through and all that. James is kind of familiar with some of that because he helped us get through some of it. But I had a whole new team that I had to bring up to speed. And one of the challenges was having them deal with stress. If you have tight deadlines on a project and you don't understand why. So I felt like I would have like side discussions, like take them to the bar, share a Coke or something like that, with them to actually explain to them like, okay, this is how a business operates, and it's like we're under funding pressure right now. The investors want to see results before they give us more funding again. So this is why it's pressured right now. But if we can get this done, then this will, and just kind of like explain all the mechanics behind that. They're totally outside of like what we're doing for our jobs. Like debugging something is one thing, and there's experiences that go along with that, but actually understanding the business context of like where a developer can add value and making sure that everybody else understands that, because then if they understand what their value is, then they sort of start to protect the culture that nurtures them, instead of like doing the other thing, which would be to complain about it and tear it down and all that.
Yeah.
So being like an ambassador of the kind of explaining what why this is the way it is. I've known some people on projects that have lasted like been there from the beginning and into a 6-year project, that would be like the old wise person in the cube that anytime you saw a code that you didn't understand what it was doing or whatever, and you needed some context, you would go to this guy and he would tell you a story for like 2 hours about all the micro decisions over the years that came about to where this thing is. And it was like an amazing thing. Now contrast that to the new programmer who's straight out of school, so all their context is what they read in books. Mm-hmm. So they're expecting everything should be perfect. It should be object-oriented, just like I thought, just like I read about and was tested on. And then they come to find that maybe it's procedural, or maybe there's duplicated code, and they get upset about it and all that. And it's nice to then provide the perspective of like from the business need of it, because ultimately we are supporting a business and adding value in a business, and to actually like kind of keep that in the team's mind at all times to I feel like really helps everybody like move forward.
So I think we have some questions from somebody watching the live stream over here. There's a book by Gerald Weinberg called Secrets of Consulting. It's very, very good, and it's full of pithy little sayings. But one of my favorites that always sticks out to me is when you're coming into an organization and you find stuff that doesn't make sense. Things are the way they are because they got that way, right? And it goes back to the blameless retrospective thing. It's pointless to try to get to the bottom of why it happened, unless you want through that to gain insight into the organization, but not to find somebody to blame. Okay, what was the question?
Jason Axelson is asking, how can you operate in a confident way without being labeled as a show-off or something similar?
by being generous with your expertise and your wisdom. And I guess even that can count as being a show-off, but there are ways to be generous with your expertise that are more about enabling and lifting the other person up and helping them achieve something while you stay in the background. Confidence in your abilities should lead you to share, not hoard. And that's my answer. If there are other answers to that question, that's great. I'm not the only one here, but
Doing it together, right?
Yeah.
I mean, coming down shoulder to shoulder.
Right. And sometimes saying, well, okay, let's try your idea. And listen. And yeah.
So the other, another part in that book was, I don't know if I have the title of his little
yeah, he has
story,
little
yeah,
titles for them all, and I forget
they're really
those.
terrific. But it was something like the hero fantasy is, if you're confident, right, you can have this fantasy that you're the hero saving the company, right? And just remember that it's your fantasy, not the company's fantasy, and they don't share your fantasy.
That's right.
Right?
That's
so
right.
go ahead and be confident, but don't expect anybody else to think that you're the hero, right? So I don't know if that helps or if it's just funny.
Both. So a couple back there.
Another one I picked up from Jim was being willing to be wrong and say, I don't know.
Yes.
And he always would say, I don't know, but let's find out.
Right.
And being willing to go on a journey with the person where, their idea is completely valid and explore it with them together. And, also being willing to say, I do like that better, or, admit when you're wrong and be willing to learn.
And when a more junior programmer has a good idea that you like, go to bat for them.
Yes.
That's a way to not be a show-off as a
champion.
confident. Yep, that's right. So Doug had a comment too.
That's really funny, James, because as soon as I heard this, I thought about Jim Wyrick, and what he would say all the time was, I don't know, let's find out.
Right.
Or he would say, I'm not sure, how would you figure that out? And I suspect many of the times he did know, and he did know how to find out.
Right.
But he put it back, and he was so willing to be curious and explore. And even though he had so much expertise, he didn't hold to that expertise.
Right.
He was willing to just dive in and go see and figure things out and explore it with you and walk you through in a very humble way, how am I going to figure this out?
And what's funny is everything about Jim Wyrick is such a good answer to that question about how to be confident without being a show-off, especially because when he wanted to, he could really show off. But he rarely did. Yeah. A couple of things I've got here that y'all have touched on. The first time as an old white dude that you feel discriminated against because of your age, that should make you more empathetic to underrepresented groups that are not a part of our field than feeling threatened by them. Okay? That's one way that we can be generous and confident and positive and make our experience count for something. Now we know how it feels, right? So that should make you more empathetic and more supportive of people who don't have the educational background that you had that's typical for people in this field, that don't look the same, and that are trying to find a way in a field that will hopefully make them a good living. Keep learning, not just technical stuff, learn about business and management. I already kind of touched on that. Here's one, and this goes back to what I was saying about minding your loyalties and not treating job security, always treating job security as kind of a myth from our parents' age. We spend a lot of time in workplaces dancing around a hard truth, which is that at bottom, employment is a cold, hard financial transaction of time and value for money. The worst employers remind you of that every day. The best employers try very hard not to bring that up, not to make you feel that. But what I've always tried to do as an employee, I'm not always successful at it, but what I've always tried to do is I keep that top of mind so my employer never has to. I think about, how much did I get paid today? Was it worth it to them? And if, like I said, I don't always do a good job of this, but when I do, I want my employer to be like, oh, yeah, we're certainly not going to put him on the layoff because he's worth every dime we pay him, right? And the way to do that is you keep it top of mind so that they don't have to. A couple of last things here that may spark more discussion, and that's okay, but they're the last things I've got. Is it smarter to be a generalist or a specialist? Yeah, well, yes is a good answer. T-shaped person, yep. So here's a bit of advice that I've given to younger programmers many times in my career, and I think it applies equally well, if not more so, to people at our stage of the career. Companies love to hire specialists, but they love to keep generalists. Hiring specialists is easier. It's a lot harder to measure in an interview situation, get a real picture of the breadth and depth of somebody who touts themselves as a generalist. So getting your foot in the door is much more about being a specialist. But making yourself valuable in the company is much more about being a generalist. And so you said T-shaped person. That's exactly the right answer. Yeah, where's the microphone? Oh, okay.
I'm not. Hello. Not speaking as being on the successful second half, but nevertheless,
yeah.
The only generalist hiring I ever had was my very first one. Well, I didn't even have an associate degree, but the guy at the consulting company just asked me a lot of questions. He said, "Yeah, I think we could work you in the sausage factory." But after that, it's always, "Yeah, do you know that thing?" Mm-hmm. It's pretty much always that.
Right. Yeah, I try to hire for potential and learning ability and adaptability, but it's kind of hard to find places that hire that way. Right.
Yeah, well, and it's been a while since I've been a W-2 person. I've been a 1099 person for like 11 years. And I've explicitly told clients at the beginning of, or just before engagement starts, I want to make it very easy for you to fire me, but I want to make you very reluctant to do so.
Yeah.
And I've worked, probably the smallest, I had a little 2-person startup that wanted to get something done a few years ago, got a referral from someone I knew from RubyConfs that I didn't know him really outside RubyConfs, but got the referral through them because they happened to be in North Carolina. And I was phenomenally expensive from what they had paid for the other people who had tried to get them to where they wanted to go. And within 2 weeks, I had a little prototype system deployed for them. And that was amazing to them. You know, and you know, I finally met him because one of the guys was actually natively from the Cincinnati area, and he was coming back. And so I actually met him, and he's, you know, the company didn't end up going where they were hoping it was going to go, and it kind of folded. But, you know, the fact that they were very appreciative of the fact that I sort of told them up front, you know, here's what I'm going to try to do for you. I want to make your stuff work, and I make no, you know, I'm not trying to hide the fact that I'm probably more expensive than the other people you may have considered to help you in this work that you want to have done. And if I don't make things happen, we're done. But if I do make things happen, I'm hoping that they're gonna happen in such a way that you're like, oh, that's worth it. And it's much easier for someone in my position to say, because they see this, you know, cost as something that they can easily, you know, cut out, and it's a full cost. You know, normally you're talking to someone with a salary, you know, oh, I make X number of $1,000 a year. The company sees that as maybe 1.5x, 1.4x, somewhere in that range, but they see me exactly how much the invoice is every time they have to pay an invoice, and that works well if they can really see that value.
Just something to add to that generalist specialist conversation. I feel like the biggest thing I've learned through apprenticing people is what somebody else, I think, came up with a sentence to describe it: hire for slope, not y-intercept.
Yes.
And it's, I mean,
what
it's
was the second half of slope? Not
y-intercept.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So like apprentices, it matters so much less than I thought how much concrete factual knowledge they have when they start, and it matters so much more how quickly they learn than I even thought it did. And I've been just blown away. But our whole industry is geared around hiring for y-intercept. Can you check these boxes? Are you a specialist? Do you have, 12 years of React at least?
Right.
Yeah.
Because I want to
see a fist fight break out over the microphone.
Is this working? I want to call grumpy old man on that one. Yeah, okay, if the whole industry is doing that, well, that, going back to the business thing, that's going to hurt them. It's the companies that understand, like like Gaslight, it's the companies that understand and provide those environments for growth that are going to succeed. That's like a basic tenet of my faith, right? So if they want to do that, there's plenty of ways to do bad things to your employees and wreck your internal culture.
Right.
Right? It's good that we got an idea of of a better way forward. Great to tell everybody about that. I don't think we need to get too hung up on those places, because eventually that's going to take care of itself.
There's an important lesson in that, which is that your recruiting and hiring. Yeah. But thanks, I appreciate it. Your recruiting and hiring process can then be undermined by your corporate culture, right? What you're recruiting and hiring for, your corporate culture needs to be there and be ready to then take on and amplify and develop. And so hiring for slope, if you have a culture that doesn't enable you to grow and give you opportunities to grow and learn, is going to fail. Recruiting and hiring for diversity, if you have a non-inclusive culture, is going to fail, because they're going to get in and leave and then tell their friends, right? And so the recruiting and hiring process and the corporate culture go hand in hand to make things successful. So.
I like your question. It's obviously a false dichotomy. Which do you want, a specialist or a generalist?
Well, sure,
So it was meant to be provocative.
Well,
but
I consider myself a generalist because I like learning things, and I just have this really broad knowledge of all kinds of different stuff, and I'm deep on only a few of them, and it served me well. Yeah. But I've also learned that it's important for me to go deep on some things to be hireable. And likewise, if I were the different kind of person that liked to dig deep and just get as specialist as I could, I would want to recognize the value of going a little broader to make myself more valuable in the place I'm in. So.
My problem with that, and again, I love the question, but my problem with it is it doesn't address the temporal nature of the question or the time-based question. I first got exposed to the Dreyfus learning model. I think it was in Andy Hunt's Refactoring Your Wetware, Pragmatic Thinking and Learning. Brilliant book, by the way. I don't recommend it to people at the beginning of their career because the Dreyfus learning model says when you're young, you need and I mean young, chronologically young in any new language or framework, and I'm terrible at
Inexperienced.
this. Inexperienced, thank you, yes. I'm terrible when I'm learning a new framework or a new language. I don't follow the prescriptive rules. I don't learn this is the right way to do it, get this little success, build these successes, because at my spectrum of the career, when I've got 20 years of JavaScript experience, the generalist kicks in and you're always in the, well, it depends, and it could be this or it could be this. And what you need to recognize is both ends of the spectrum are valuable. It depends on where you are on the spectrum. If you're learning a language, you need to take this very dogmatic, prescriptive approach. And then if you've got the years of experience beyond it, that's when you get to play, though it depends card. But I need to forever remind myself of this. When I'm learning a framework, I immediately want to disagree with the framework. And I want to say, that's not how I would do it. It's like, exactly. But you haven't learned the basics of the framework yet to make those kind of judgment calls. So the spectrum of it depends. If you're brand new to a technology or language, I would love for you to be very dogmatic and be very fiery and passionate about there's one true way to do this kind of thing because it's appropriate. But then if you've got 20 years of experience as an agilist, if you're still playing Agile Sheriff, that's when I get very concerned because you haven't progressed as a technologist.
All right, I'm stepping in here. I have two comments. One of which is that Nicholson's is across the street, and they have a beautiful selection of both whiskey and bourbon and other refreshments of the liquid variety and food, even though we didn't offer you any food tonight. I love the conversation, and it's becoming impassioned, which is fantastic. And there's lots more details that we can dive into. And I would encourage you to do that at Nicholson's across the street. The second point that I have, and I want to maybe set a time box here on the next 10 minutes. It's 8:03. We've been here for 2 hours. For the next 10 minutes, I want to think about what do we make of this group. And as Glenn correctly pointed us to the next gathering, how do we walk away from this excited about the next time that we come? Is it just an opportunity for us to share our collective wisdom, or what more do we want from this group? All right, sounds like Tom is asking for the mic.
So what I was saying to Ben before this whole thing started was, I don't go to too many meetups anymore because, my cynical view of it, it's not 100%, but, seems to be person reads a blog article, person gets really excited about it, does a talk. While those are fine, and, I've done plenty of those myself, it doesn't really, at this point in my career, does not really benefit me too much. I can go learn React on my own. I can learn Elixir on my own, Elm, whatever, Clojure, anything I want. But learning those things does not eliminate the challenges that I have to face at my job day to day, which is how to deal with a huge legacy code base that you didn't write and was not designed the way that you wanted. It's like you now own it, and it makes money, or it has users, and how do you make it better from then on? That kind of thing. Or another one might be, the same thing with when you're asking for requirements and they explain to you a workflow process and you say, finite state machine, and they go, no, you don't want anything like that. But then 2 years from then, when it's actually being used, you go, gosh darn it, I wish I had done the finite state machine, but they didn't want to budget for it. What do you do then? Or how do you sell it so that you can or why aren't there libraries that just make it, easy for me to, I know there's a finite state machine gem, so don't jump in on that. But it's like, it's like, for my colleagues are mostly front-end developers and really super excited about JavaScript. And I kind of abstract it down to what they're excited about is basically keeping the HTML in sync, the data in the HTML in sync with the code, and then communicating to some other code, which to me was actually a solved problem back in ASP.NET Web Forms. Now we're doing it differently, it's better, but that problem was a solved problem, and we haven't. And to me, it's like, any new technology I get into, it's like, okay, we're going to turn over this thing, and this is how we move state around in the application, and it's like, and then after that, it's like, okay, go, and it's like, well, I still have to figure out how to manage the legacy code base. I still have to figure out how to work workflows in and sell a finite state machine framework to somebody that doesn't understand one of those or whatever. And I seem like that would be, if I was to start going to meetups again on a regular basis, besides going over Nicholson's afterwards, which I rather enjoy, that stuff. I would hope that there would be an opportunity for things like that are more the day-to-day job things, not the I read a blog article. I mean, there's places for those. There's plenty of avenues for those, but I just wish there was one once a month meeting where I could learn something that would actually make my job easier or better. So that's what Ben wanted me to say.
Yeah, how I dealt with a messy challenge instead of how I built something in a green field. Right.
Well, and it's not just that. I feel like what you're saying is there's a lot of young vigor in the industry that we've kind of outgrown. We're still trying to support, do what's best for business and draw on each other's vast experience while still, keeping our head in the right place and being good mentors to each other. So however we can nurture each other and charter forward with those goals in mind, I think would be useful. I mean, go ahead, James. Sorry.
Sorry, Mark. So one of the things I would hope to get out of this group, other than seeing some people that I've missed a lot and feeling like this is Agile Roundtable 2, which was kind of my hope. I was talking to Jeremy, I was like, maybe we could just trick everybody to coming again next month, same time. Clearly this time works for everybody. But what I would hope to get out of it is how can I be more effective? And how do I answer some hard questions about where I am in my career? How do I know when I've been somewhere too long? No offense to all the other gaslighters here. I'm right. How do I know what I'm good at? I'm really, really good at knowing what I'm terrible at, right? How do I know what I'm good at? Those kind of things. How can I be more effective, not just to myself, but to other people around me? Those kind of things. That's what I'm hoping to get out.
Is it still fun to fail,
Yeah,
James?
I like failing. Spectacular if I can, with fire, but fast. Yes, yes, but I'm impatient. Yes.
Well, to his question about bringing questions from work and getting experiences, I'm very confident that this group, from what we did back in the CART days, could just show up with no agenda and carry that forward. I think we could, at a quarterly basis, there's plenty. Right? I think that's easy enough. We could just show up and you could ask your question, and I bet that we could spend the whole evening making some progress on what that was, right? So I don't think we need to stress too much about this. If you're like driving for what do we do next month, that would be my straw man. Next month, let's show up, or in next quarter. If somebody has something better than that, cool. If not, could be a starting point.
I agree with you a lot, Mark, that there is a tremendous amount of wisdom in this room. And if somebody has a specific question, I have a lot of confidence that we collectively can come to that question with openness and curiosity and wisdom and walk away with real options. I want to be careful, though, and not just leave things haphazard. And I really want to be intentional personally myself about how I spend my time and where I focus my efforts, and where we end up, and thinking about the long vision. I do have another question. We talked about a quarterly gathering. There's been words about monthly gatherings, and so maybe I might ask for a show of hands. How many people here would attend regularly if we were monthly?
Can I use the voting mobile item on that?
Okay, Mark, what do you have to say?
You're talking about monthly, which is something to consider. We're talking about quarterly, also something to consider. Maybe quarterly is a formal agenda. The other 2 months we meet.
All right, so Mark says wisely. This is one of the reasons why I like Mark Haskamp to be around. We could use the quarterly schedule for something more structured and intentional, and the monthly schedule for something more ad hoc and just collective wisdom. Social collective wisdom.
And the monthlies, we can open up to like second quarter people instead of second half people.
Second quarter people instead of second half people. I'll say this. I was a little uptight about starting this, and Bill was very patient with me. And I was going to check IDs at the elevator. Are you 45? If you're not 45, I'm just going to send you directly to the bar, and we'll see you later. I really, when I had so much internal angst about my whole career that I'm like, if you're 40 years old, or especially if you're 39, there's no way that you can empathize with where I am in the crisis of my career. But what I've come to realize is that there's a whole host of people who are looking at their career and wondering what's best next. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to limit this audience to people who have gray beards and worked on 8-inch floppy disk, as we talked about at the beginning. At the same time, I also don't want this group to devolve into, like Tom said, I read a blog post, let me tell you about it. Yep. This is a group where I really want us to be intentional about what we're doing and trying to... John Maxwell says, experience is not the best teacher. Evaluated experience is the best teacher. And so how can we evaluate the experience we have and figure out what to do with it? And I love Glenn's question that resonated so much, is how do we really get the value from our experience?
So the one thought, and this is just opening up to the group, that I have on this is we've all been at this for a long time and have a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom and a lot of things to share. And if we're really second half developers, I feel compelled to look outside of this old men's club to see how we can have an impact on the world. What experiences we can share and what wisdom we can share, not just tactical, but with a purpose, so that we can, help James with the struggles that he's going through, help help me with the struggles that I'm going through as an is being able to claim some title of architect for an enterprise for a decade and not knowing what's next, and how can I have an impact on the world and my organization and the community, and how do I give back?
And related to that, I would encourage you not to make sure that you address non-technical topics as well as technical topics. And that might be even something like diet and exercise, because that affects how yeah, this is clearly a do as I say, not as I do thing, but it affects how effective your brain is, right?
All right, I really am thankful that each of you are here tonight. It was a blessing to me. And let's take Mark Haskamp's advice, and I'll see you next month on the last Tuesday of the month at roughly 6 o'clock, and then we'll go from there.
And the diet and exercise is the walk to Nicholson's.
The walk to Nicholson's.
The diet is what we consume.
All right, sounds great. We'll wrap this up, and I'll see you at Nicholson's. And as Bill said, certainly a big thanks to Glenn for coming up here and facilitating it.
It was my pleasure.
And a big thanks to Tim for wrangling AV while we're here.